Hi, I'm Marie. Welcome back to my channel. While editing this video, I realized that I needed to break it up into several parts. It was way too long, and I know most of the people watching are going to be my friends, but even they would be like, dude, I'm not listening to you for 3 hours. That's too much. So I'm going to do this first part, which is from the time that I got married up until my first miscarriage. The second video will be from the night of my miscarriage and not long after. And then the third one will be after up until we started IVF. And then we're in the process of doing IVF right now with the coronavirus. I'm not really sure where we're at with that and what's going to happen, if we're going to be able to do it later this month or not. So that's where my series is kind of going to be. Maybe I'm going to only get to do once a week a video because I'm not sure where I'm at in the process. And in the meantime, let's go into what I filmed the other day. In 2016, my husband and I got married, and right after we got back from, it was like a 2-day honeymoon, we had to go back to work. We were in our little happy just got married bubble, and then that weekend after we got back, I was just so tired, and I just thought it was kind of jet lag and having to go back to work for like 2 days. I don't know why we didn't take those 2 days off, and just rest for a couple days. And then I felt kind of nauseous, and I thought it was just, again, jet lag. And Sunday night, my husband's like, you've been nauseous for 2 days. Maybe you're pregnant. I was like, no. And we had been trying. We had talked about wanting a baby, and I was 38 at the time. So I was just like, well, I'm going to get off my birth control. I'm old enough to not wait until I get married. I don't care about that. Like, some people are religious and whatever, but I knew he's the right guy. We were trying, and I was tracking things on an app on my iPad, but I wasn't really paying attention. And my periods are super irregular. I have polycystic ovarian cyst syndrome. I'm trying to say that without saying it wrong. And I have one cyst on my left ovary that I've had for at least 10 years that they've been able to track it. And I don't know why they don't remove it, but that's another thing that I have to talk to my doctors about. But my right ovary is fine, but because of that cyst, my periods are very unusual. They're not like every 30 days or 28 days, whatever. My cycle is just whenever it feels like it. That Sunday after we got back, he said, maybe you're pregnant. I was like, no. And then I had some pregnancy tests left over from some exam that one of my doctors did, that they wanted to make sure that I wasn't pregnant. When I did it, it was like a blood test or something. And then I can't even remember, but I for some reason, they were like, we have to make sure you're not pregnant when we do this. And I was like, okay. So, I had bought a box of like 2, and so I had 1. And the next day, newer tests, you can do it at any time, but I didn't read the instructions. I was just like, just pee on a stick. And the older ones, they would say on there, do it their first pee in the morning, because your hormones collect in overnight, and during the day, if you pee more often, it's usually a lot of water. I drink a lot of water. So it's more diluted, and if you're early on in your pregnancy, it's harder for the test to tell if it's diluted. So I grabbed it. I went to work. We worked together at the time, and we would get there pretty early. So when we first got there, I didn't have to pee, and I was like, all right, it's like 8:30. Most people don't get into like 9:30 or 10. And then around 9:30, I was like, okay, I have to pee. So I went to the bathroom, and somebody came in, and I was like, oh God, because I'm there, crinkle. And I couldn't see who it was because I'm in the stall. I just saw shoes, and I was just like, I don't want this person in there taking a pregnancy test. It's such a weird thing to do at work. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's ever taken one at work, but I took it, and then there's 2 lines. The first line is the if you're pregnant or not pregnant line. The second one is the control line. I was not thinking, because I was worried about the woman that was in the bathroom with me. I was just like, oh, go away already. And so I'm just sitting there holding it, and the first line right away turned blue. And I'm thinking, oh good, the test is working, because again, not thinking. And then the second line, the control line, turned blue, and she was still there, and I was like, no way. I kept staring at it, was like, oh my God, I'm pregnant. oh my God. And I put it back in the little foil wrapper thing that it came in, and I put it in my pocket. And it also had a cap, so it wasn't like pee was dripping anywhere or anything like that. But I just wanted to hide it, so I had like a big sweater on. And I put it in my pocket, and I washed my hands, and I left. And I got my husband. I'm like, come here, come here, come here. And he's like, what? I'm like, come here. And he's like, what? I'm like, I need to talk to you, but not here, because there's cameras and there's people. Again, it was pretty early, so there wasn't a lot of people yet. But I took him nearby. There's a stairwell, and I knew there wasn't a camera there. And I pulled it out of my pocket, and I showed him. He's like, no. I'm like, yes. He's like, no. I'm like, yeah. He's like, are you sure? I was like, these are pretty accurate. And he's like, oh my God. And then he hugged me, and we were all excited. So it was just like, we talked about it when we got home, and it was like perfect timing. And I was like, okay, I'm pregnant. I called my doctor later on at lunchtime, and I didn't really let it sink in right away that I was pregnant because I'm at work, and I didn't want that to like take over my entire day, but it was like, I'm trying to concentrate and everything. And I was like, oh my God. So that night we got home, and we told my cousin. He was living with us at the time, and he was just like, oh, that's so great and everything. And then a couple days later, we used to take public transportation, and in the Bay Area, it's called BART. And it was 10 minutes from our house. So my husband would drive. He liked to drive. I didn't care. I was like, whatever. So he's driving, he's driving us home, and I had to pee so bad, and I couldn't hold it. And then I started crying, and he's like, why are you crying? I'm like, because I have to pee. And he was just looking at me like, oh my God, you're crazy. I'm like, and then I just started crying because that was the first time I was like, oh my God, I'm really pregnant. And I was bawling, like just tears just streaming down my face. I had a tissue, and it was like soaking wet. I was like, oh my God. And I wasn't sure if I could hold it. We were like 3 minutes from the house at this point. We were so close, but I was just like, hurry up. And I was able to hold it, but he was just like, what was that? And he laughs about it every time he mentions me crying uncontrollably, because that was so unusual for me. And it was just the hormones and really letting myself let it sink in and letting myself think, oh my God, you're really having a baby. And so that was like kind of my crazy moment where you see it on TV, like women will just cry and be super emotional for like no reason. And you're like, what? So that was my moment. It was so funny. And we went to the doctor like a week later, and I was further along than I had estimated, but they did the ultrasound, and they're like, here's your baby. And I was like, wow, because it was, it had a head, and it didn't have like a lot of distinguishable parts, but it just, I don't know, it felt like it had this giant head and this little tiny body. But it was like, okay, there's an actual baby and everything. It's not just, most of the time when you go between 6 to 8 weeks, it's like this little dot that you can barely see, and they're like, yeah, there's your baby, and you're like, I don't see the dot, like Rachel from Friends, where she's like, I don't see it. That's kind of what most people get right away, but I was probably like 2 or 3 weeks farther along than I thought, because my doctor was like, are you sure? And I had my phone with me, and I had the same app on my phone as I do on my iPad, and I was like, okay, it could either be this week or this week. And she was like, because you kind of look farther along than that. This doctor was, I'm not kidding, she wasn't even 5 feet tall. She was this little itty bitty woman. And then my husband is 6'4" and I'm 5'8". And I'm looking at her, I'm like, well, yeah, your baby, if you had one, like, I don't think at her age the ultrasound was a thing, because I know when I was born, ultrasounds didn't exist yet. And she looked like she could be my mom's age. So I'm thinking, yeah, when you had your baby, ultrasounds didn't exist, so you didn't see how big they are. But I'm like, you're tiny. You're a tiny little woman, so your baby was probably small. We are big people. Like, my husband's not a fat guy, but, think of Shrek. He's this huge guy. He's not going to have small babies. So I'm just like, okay, our baby's big. You don't want them to be too big, because it does cause problems when you're trying to give birth and everything. And our baby wasn't too big. It was just like, we're big people. We're not going to have a tiny, tiny child. So we got through the first ultrasound, and, she's like, everything is fine. You're going along great. But a few days later, I was bleeding, and it wasn't, like, now looking back, it wasn't anything I should have been alarmed about. People don't talk about it very much, but you will bleed. It's totally normal. I went to the doctor though because I was concerned, and with my age, they were like, okay, you should come in and we'll check and everything. And she was like, it's probably just, old blood left over from your last period just coming out, and that's totally normal. And I'm like, okay. But she did another ultrasound. So this was about a week and a half after the one that I did before. And I didn't know she was going to do an ultrasound. My husband was really mad because I got to see the baby and it was even bigger than last time. And he's just like, that's not fair. I'm like, I'm sorry. It's not like they said, oh, we're going to do an ultrasound. They were just like, come in and we'll do an exam. They didn't mention ultrasound. So he was a little jealous and I was like, I'm sorry, next time you're coming. So when I got to the 3-month mark, I had already told some people at work because even though I worked in an office, I was the studio office manager at Ubisoft in San Francisco. And when people think of office managers, think of somebody just sitting there doing paperwork and typing on a computer. And I did do some of that stuff, but my job was actually very physical compared to other office-y jobs. And I would have to set up food, and I would bring up, we had a freight elevator and we were on the second floor. And so I would have to try and lift the elevator door, which looked like a giant garage door. And it was really old and it was rusty and it didn't slide well. And they oiled it all the time, but it still, with earthquakes and everything, and when it was just its age, it was a little warped. So I looked like an Olympic weightlifter because I would pull it up to a certain point and then I would have to flip it around and then push all the way up and be like, And when I found out I was pregnant, I was like, I'm not doing that. That, it would always put a lot of strain. I could feel my core muscles working, and, I wasn't as fat as I am now, but you could feel that trying to lift it. And so I told some people at work and they were really helpful. They were like, no problem, just let us know when you need help. And I didn't tell a whole lot of other people though, because the 3-month mark is where, that's where they're like, okay, if you're gonna have a miscarriage, it'll probably happen within that point. So after 3 months, the miscarriage rate goes down a lot. But I still needed to tell a few people. And a few days after the 3-month mark, I got a letter from even though I worked in the studio, I actually worked for a temp agency because they weren't sure if they were going to keep my job around after. It was a very new position. There was one other person who had it for 2 weeks before me. And it was something that evolved, my responsibilities. I kind of made most of them up myself because I was like, well, I could help with this and do that. And it wasn't like they were like, okay, this is your job. This is exactly what you're going to do. And my point. So they only had me, scheduled to work for a few months, and then the game was supposed to be finished. And then they were going to reevaluate everything. Well, the game got extended. So my bosses had emailed me saying that they were extending my contract. And I was like, okay, now is the perfect time to tell them that I'm pregnant. And my husband and I had discussed it, and I was going to stay at home with the baby because I looked into childcare, and it was, besides being really, really expensive, I would have made about $500 at the end of the month, for the entire month, after what I made, just almost all of it going to childcare. And my husband has a really good job, so it's not like we would have been super poor, but I thought all of that work and I get $500 in a whole month. And then I don't spend any time with my child at all. That part of it was really hard. And I know a lot of women have to do that. They have to work and it's not a choice, but we did have the choice. And I told my bosses, and they've known my husband for years. They only knew me for a few months. So they were kind of like, oh, wow. And they're like, Patrick's going to be a dad. And they were just kind of like, wow. Because he's really different. My chair's squeaky. He's really different with me at home than he is at work. At work, he's super serious and very focused and stays on topic. And he'll joke around occasionally, but he's just he just has like blinders on, and he's like, this is what I need to do. This is my job. But at home, he's a goofball. Like, he'll do silly things. And when he's with his sister, his older sister, he's like a 7-year-old kid. He's hilarious. So they don't see that side of him. And I thought it was weird because I didn't know, hair on my face. I didn't know that he was so serious at work because I met him outside of that, and we met and we didn't work together when we met. So I was like, okay, you're really, really serious and uptight at work. And I'm like goofy all the time. Like, when I have things to do, I focus and I do it, but in between times I'll be super goofy, and he's really not. So they were like, wow, he's gonna have a baby. And I feel like I didn't pick up my cats, but I feel like I did because I feel like I have little hairs on my face. Um, there. So, they were just like, okay, well, I was just like, I'm not going to be able to work past, I think it was like July. My baby was due around the end of July. So I was like, at some point I'm going to leave like maybe a week before I have my baby. Maybe 2 weeks, So they were like, okay. And it was still months away. And this was, let me see. I'm going to say this was like the end of January at that point. So January 2017. And they're like, okay, we'll discuss it more later on. And I was like, all right. Because they also needed to focus on what they were doing. And the game was supposed to be launched by, I think this somewhere around September was supposed to be done. So that was kind of not a great time for me to want to leave either. But they weren't going to fire me and be like, well, you can't fire somebody who's pregnant anyway. But, they didn't want to just be like, well, let's get somebody else in here who's not going to leave. And I feel like they liked me too. So they were like, all right, we'll keep you as long as you can stay. So that was I think it was like the end of January when that happened, maybe beginning of February. And things were just moving along. And I didn't like make an announcement at work, like, guess what, everybody, I'm pregnant. Because I was still, like, I'm fat, so I wasn't really showing. A lot of people just had no idea. And at some point, I was carrying really high, like right under my boobs. And I thought, I don't know why I was thinking this, but to me, it felt like the baby just pushed all my organs up, and I thought that was my organs, and the baby was down lower, because it was just it. I had a B-shaped belly instead of a round belly, like a D shape. At work, people just didn't really know, and I was okay. Like, I wasn't really gonna say anything until later anyway, until like maybe 5 months where I was really showing, and but I was wearing the maternity pants. They were so comfortable. I read some article online. It was like, don't buy maternity clothes, just, rework what you have. Really? You must be really, really skinny to like, just be like, I'm just going to wear what I have. Because, like, yeah, a lot of the shirts I did buy maternity shirts as well. I needed some new clothes anyways. And I bought a few shirts, maybe like 5 or 6 shirts that I could rotate with other things. But the pants, having the stretchy topped pants, oh my God, it was so much better because you still look like you're wearing jeans, but it stretches, and so it's not tight around your stomach. And that was not helping because I still had, I was still having morning sickness well into the 4th month. It wasn't until about 2 weeks before I actually had my miscarriage that the morning sickness stopped. So maybe a week before, it was like, finally, I don't have morning sickness anymore. And then I lost my baby, but that's coming in a few minutes. So, people didn't really notice. And then I did, like, you can't really say, I would do this and I would hold my tummy a lot because I could feel it. If you do this on your hand, that's kind of what it feels like when the baby kicks, when it's really tiny. And like people would describe it as like a butterfly feeling, and it just felt like the baby just like kind of ran across my stomach, and I was like, oh, the baby kicked. But and my husband was like, oh, I want to feel, and I was like, it just happened super quick, and then it stopped, and he was just like, you couldn't feel it. It's not like when you're later along around like 8 or 9 months, like 7, 8 months, where it's like you can see your belly bouncing because the baby's kicking, and you're like, oh yeah, you can feel it. It was super fast, and I don't think if I had my hand on my stomach, I would have felt it outside. I could feel it inside. So he was a little jealous that he didn't get to feel the baby kick. But, I would like kind of rub my stomach a lot because I was nauseous so often too. And I was just kind of like, maybe if I rub my belly, he'll like stop making me feel sick. So we went for another ultrasound, and you could really see the shape of the baby at that point. And we didn't want to know if it was a boy or a girl. I was just like, everybody always knows. And then when you see people like on TV talk about their pregnancy and stuff, the last few weeks they're just like, oh my God, get this baby out of me. I want to be like, I can't wait to see what it's going to be. Like, I want to be surprised if it's a boy or a girl. I really thought I was going to have a girl though. And around 4.5 months, we went shopping. We bought a crib and the diaper changing table, and some clothes, like basic little things just to have stuff at the house for when we did have the baby. It wasn't like we weren't like, oh, we don't have anything. We bought a lot of gender neutral stuff. We didn't really think, oh, we're just going to get pink or blue. And it's a baby. It doesn't care what color it's wearing. And I'm like, if somebody gives me something pink, I'm going to put it on my baby if I have a boy. Or if they give me something blue, I'm still going to put it on my little girl. It doesn't matter what color they're wearing. As they get a little older, that's probably when, if you feel like dressing them a specific color, that's when it'll be more important. But, newborns, they eat and sleep and poop. I mean, they don't care what they're wearing. They really don't. I don't think I cared what I was wearing until I was about 4. And then I had a Care Bear t-shirt that I wanted to wear all the time. My friend that lived across the street, her older sister, was like, every time I see you have that Care Bear shirt on, I was like, it's my favorite shirt. And I didn't realize I wore it that often, but apparently I was wearing it more than once a week. But, so, where am I with my story? So things were going well. Everything was moving along, and we, even though I was 38 at the time, and they said, you're kind of at the high risk pregnancy frame, I don't feel like they were really checking on me too much because the 3 times that I had gone to the doctor, everything was fine.